You're listening to Radio Chatskill. I'm Tim Bruno. In 1884, Richard Grant White of The Critic wrote that humor was, quote, that rarest of qualities in a woman, end quote. That's to say, women aren't funny. Author Busy Coy begs to differ. Her SCRIBBLEWITS project shows us that women are funny and that there's thousands of years of evidence to prove it. Culture reporter Valerie Mansi spoke to Busy Coy about the secret history of funny women.
Welcome, Busy, to Radio Chatskill.
Thanks for having me, Valerie.
Well, we are delighted to have you and delighted that you're here to discuss this project that you embarked upon 4 or 5 years ago called SCRIBBLEWITS. And folks can see that and more on your website, which is
BusyCoy.com. That's BIZZYCOY.com.
I love the way you titled it. A Secret History of Funny Women from Back in Time, illuminated by Busy Coy. And I loved that illuminated because you do illuminate.
Thank you. Yeah, this project is a self-imposed research project for me to discover funny women from all across different historic time periods and all around the world. I used the word illuminated to describe my part of this project because there are actual academic researchers who have uncovered and quote unquote discovered these women, these funny women who have kind of fallen out of mainstream history. And so I didn't want to take all the credit for quote unquote discovering or writing about them, but I did feel like I did my part by simply illuminating them just a little bit by putting them and their stories onto my website.
And it should be said that you do have references for folks to go to.
Yeah. The project really is composed of, right now there's 32 stories about 32 women, and you can click on the story or the woman that interests you. And then there's a short article about her that I've written that I've tried to infuse my own humor into, so it's not just a dry academic history of a woman. It is bringing my own personality to it. But then at the end, I do link to the academic resources and journals where I found this information. The shocking thing to me is there's not a lot of reference material about any of these 32 women because some of them existed in ancient times and there simply just isn't a lot written about them. And in other cases, I think people just did not think they were important enough to document. So I give a lot of credit to the researchers who did do the work to find and investigate these funny women.
What did you discover, especially about those in ancient times?
Well, what's interesting is there's been funny women since the beginning of women. So all the way back to, we have evidence in ancient Greece of a couple of funny women, and I'm sure there were many more. Two that particularly caught my eye was a woman called Sulpicia, who was a writer, who was a poet, and what she wrote was called satire. Now, satire, the way we know it now, where we're sort of poking fun at something, is not what satire was in ancient Greece. It was a form of poetry, but it often did have a humorous angle to it, but different from the way we think of satire today. Sulpicia is known as the only female satirist of ancient Greece on record. Only 2 lines of her satirical poetry remain, and they have very little meaning for us today because they're truly scraps, not even full sentences. But it caught my eye that, you know, this woman made her way all the way from ancient Greek times to today. The fact that there is a remnant of her that remains is amazing. Another woman from ancient times who was a funny woman was called Julia the Elder. Now, she was kind of a socialite of her day. I think of her as the Kim Kardashian or even a Paris Hilton of her time. She was the daughter of a wealthy ruler, and she lived a bombastic, flashy, flamboyant lifestyle. And she got into a lot of trouble, which is what I like about her. Back in the day, sort of tales of her extravagant exploits, often of a sexual nature, became sort of the stuff of modern day legend of the time. And so jokes and lines and comebacks and repartee made its way into the common language that were attributed to her. Things about all of her pregnancies, things about her children, things about her lovers. There were these little quotes and jokes in the zeitgeist of the time that were attributed to the wild and bombastic Julia the Elder.
And you also reference a number of female jesters as well as female clowns. Can you talk about them a little bit?
So there were female court jesters, which people might not know. One of them that I found particularly dynamic was Mathurine, who existed in 16th century and 17th century France, and she was known to be a jester to King Henry IV. Now, King Henry IV was a very unpopular king,
yes,
and he had many attempts on his life. And the reason this female jester is known to us is because there is a story that she saved his life from one of these assassination attempts. Now, it's probably all been twisted over time, so we don't really know what happened, but the story is that a man broke into the king's chambers with a knife, and Mathurine was the one to block him from the king. We don't know what that really entailed, or whether she just stood there or whether she attacked him and threw him out the window. We don't know. But she found her way into the history books, not only for being funny, for being a jester, but for saving the king's life.
It's interesting to discover that the false notion that women aren't funny goes way back through the ages, while funny women also go back through the ages.
Absolutely. There's been funny women since there have been women. And at the same time, there have been people saying women aren't funny since there have been women. I think some of that might have to do with the fact that humor is power. And if we can tell women they don't have that power, then that's a little piece of power we strip away from ourselves.
That's an interesting insight. Can you talk a little bit about Kate Sanborn? She wrote The Wit of Women.
Yes. So you said people have been saying women aren't funny for a long time. And Kate Sanborn is a woman who pushed back against that notion in a book that she wrote in 1885 called The Wit of Women. The Wit of Women was Kate Sanborn's response to an article that was published in The Critic magazine a year earlier in 1884, in which a critic said that humor was, quote, the rarest of qualities in women, which is a thinly veiled insult saying of all the qualities women have, humor might be the rarest. And Kate Sanborn took great offense to that. And so she set about almost doing a project akin to what I feel my SCRIBBLEWITS project is, where she set out to collect funny and witty and amusing writings from women and to compile them in that she called The Wit of Women. And that was a direct response to this article that she had read. And she even puts it in the book and talks about how that inspired her to show everybody, men and women, just how funny women are.
Are there any other funny women you'd like to tell our audience about before we conclude?
Yes. So one of the women that inspired me to start this project, I discovered while I was doing research for an application for the Fulbright program. And I was writing about humor writing, which is what I do. I do humor writing. And I was writing in my application about how I wanted to learn more about humor writers of history and funny women of history. And in putting that application together, I discovered a woman named Stella. And Stella was a dear, dear friend of a very famous humorist you might know called Jonathan Swift.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Swift wrote A Modest Proposal, which is still one of the most famous satirical pieces of all time, proposing that the rich should eat the poor, which was a fantastical thing to put in print in his day. So he was known for being incredibly funny. He also wrote Gulliver's Travels, other pieces that you know. But Jonathan Swift thought the funniest person he knew was his friend Stella, and he admired her wit so much that he collected what he called her bon mots. I don't know how you pronounce that in French. Somebody can pronounce it better than me. And he collected her 10 or more of her funniest sayings and jokes that he had recalled, and he put them into his book when he published it. So he included her in his own published book. And that was the only work she ever had published. And it was because he so admired her, he thought she deserved to be in print as well.
What a wonderful little story.
Yes, I was really inspired by learning that. And that really snowballed my journey of researching all of these women and realizing how many more there were. And every time I learned about one woman, it would send me to the path of another woman and another woman and another one. And then I had all of this research material. It was a wonderful gift.
And it's a wonderful gift to the audience.
Absolutely. And the fun of discovering them, I did want to share that fun with the audience. So I'm glad that came through and you enjoyed it yourself.
Yes. And you can tell us your website again and what else is on your website, because you've got quite a bit on there.
Yes. So you can go directly to SCRIBBLEWITS by going to scribblewits.org. And that's SCRIBBLEWITS.org. You can also go to my website that has all of my work on it, which is bizzycoy.com, BIZZYCOY.com. And on that website, you can buy my new book, Personal Space, which is a collection of my own funny writing, which is on sale now. You can see the events that I'm going to upcoming, yarn slingers, live readings, events of that sort. And you can read all of my published humor pieces that have been in places like The New Yorker, McSweeney's, and other websites. Those are all available for free on my website.
Well, thank you so much, Busy Coy, for coming in. And thank you so much for embarking on this project. It's really a treat.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
And culture reporter Valerie Mansi speaking to local author Busy Coy.